Tobacco in sports, nicotine and sports performance. So according to a study published this month, anywhere from a third to nearly half of serious athletes playing team sports are using nicotine to enhance performance. The author of the study, School of Sport, Exercise and Nutrition senior lecturer Dr. Toby Mundell, found that nicotine use is fairly high in team sports and is increasing. So he designed the study to try and figure out why athletes are using it and how it affects physical performance. He reviewed 10 previously performed studies that looked at the effects of nicotine on muscular strength and power, endurance, and high-intensity exercise. From these studies, he found that 2 showed nicotine as having an ergogenic effect, which means showing an increase in performance. 1 study showed that nicotine impaired performance, and the rest of them, 7 studies, showed no change at all. All of these studies were small studies performed on healthy and active participants, although none on elite athletes. But outside of the studies, there is other research that shows elite athletes using it, which we'll talk about next. So who is using nicotine? Dr. Mundell excluded any studies that reported use of smoking, since tobacco smoking would not be beneficial to a high-performing athlete. His research found that nicotine use is high within elite and professional athlete environments. It's mostly prevalent in baseball and ice hockey, but there is also high use in strength-based and winter sports. People in team sports use it the most, and endurance athletes use it the least. A regular doping control test at the 2009 Men's World Ice Hockey Championships looked at 72 players, 2 men from each team. What the test found is that out of 72 people, 53% of them had at least one of the nicotine's metabolites in their system. This likely means that they use nicotine, but maybe not for performance enhancement. But based on levels of concentration, 36% of these players appeared to be actively using nicotine, either directly before the game or even during the game. 2 samples showed very high concentrations, more than a typical nicotine user, which suggested that these 2 players were using nicotine for performance enhancement. That was the beginning of the research into nicotine and doping. After this, a 1-year study took place that analyzed 2,185 urine samples from athletes in 43 different types of sports. Traces of nicotine were found in 23% of samples, with athletes in American football, ice hockey, and wrestling using it the most. So why are athletes using nicotine? Well, according to Dr. Mundell, athletes who use nicotine have stated that they do so because it prevents dry mouth, it controls weight, it improves reaction time, it improves focus, and it helps with relaxation. Dr. Mundell confirms that studies have shown cognitive enhancement, better memory, improved focus, and better motor skills. He notes that there are various factors that impact the effects of nicotine absorption, such as the user's nutrition, age, race, genetics, and other medications being used. The different methods of delivery also affect absorption. Smoking results in the highest blood concentration of nicotine, followed by vaping, then by transdermal patch, then by snus. The fastest methods of reaching maximum nicotine concentration are by smoking at 5 to 8 minutes, then by inhaler at 30 minutes. Here's where you can see another reason why smoking is so addictive. There's a huge gap there, 5 to 8 minutes versus 30 minutes. Smoking is definitely the fastest way to get nicotine. Vaping actually falls at the very bottom of the list, taking about 70 to 75 minutes to reach peak concentration. It's followed only by the patch, which takes 6 to 9 hours. One thing I want to point out here is that this doesn't mean it takes 70 minutes for the nicotine to be absorbed by the body by vaping. That's just how long it takes to reach the highest potential concentration. You might actually see results much sooner than that from lower levels of nicotine. So let's talk about what the studies show. Based on the results of 10 different studies, researchers found no changes in some areas, negative in some areas, and positive in some areas. The studies show that peak performance, mean power output, maximum oxygen uptake, endurance time, and lactic acid production were unaffected by nicotine. They also tested specific exercises like hand grip strength, jump height, agility, and shuttle runs. They saw no change in nicotine as well. On the negative side, maximum force and rate of force development were reduced. So rate of force development is how explosive an athlete is in doing a particular exercise. The faster the rate of development is, the better. So in this case, athletes were less explosive after using nicotine. As for the positives, researchers found that peak torque while jumping increased by 6% after using 2 mg nicotine gum, and endurance time while cycling improved by 17%. And one thing I want to note here is that all of these tests were performed using smokeless tobacco, which according to the study we now know takes 60 minutes to reach maximum nicotine concentration in the blood. All of the studies were done before participants reached that 60-minute mark, so I wonder if they would have seen different results if they would have waited longer. Also, one of these studies specifically tested vaping nicotine, but this is one of the studies that saw no improvements in performance. This test consisted of 20 healthy non-smokers vaping on 18 mg nicotine cartridges once every 30 seconds for 10 minutes. So, all said and done, it looks like there are pros and cons to using nicotine for performance enhancement, and the pros probably don't outweigh the cons. But there are a lot of gaps in this research and a ton of opportunity for researchers to learn more. For example, all of the different delivery methods could be tested at various time intervals. Habitual users versus non-habitual users should be tested. Different ethnicities and genders should be tested, and different types of exercises can be tested. And something that Dr. Mundell points out is that there are notable limitations in these studies and with the participants involved. For example, some subjects have different tolerances to nicotine, different individual responses depending on the delivery methods, and some participants fail to follow the scientific procedure. So if you plan to try nicotine for performance enhancement, consider that you will probably have to test dosages and delivery systems to find what works for you. I've actually known about the performance enhancing effects of nicotine for several years. It was one of the first things that I tested on myself when I started vaping again in 2015. I've tested vaping nicotine several times, both before and during weight training sessions. I've also tested it during endurance cycling rides. Personally, I don't like it. It makes me feel sluggish, but my tests were very non-scientific. If I keep testing eventually, I might find the perfect dosage or the timing or delivery method that works for me. But then again, maybe I won't. And one more thing I think is worth mentioning here, many elite athletes might not be using nicotine for performance enhancement. They might actually be using it to abstain from smoking. And this goes to show that even professional athletes can use nicotine and play at the top of their game without suffering the negative health effects of smoking.